So there I was, innocently going about my business in Barnsley, early in the general election, and we were on the bus, and I could see a bloke, fairly unkempt, and I saw him take a cup. And by the way, don't believe the news when they say they threw paper cups at me. You can throw as many paper cups at me as you want. And anyway, they wouldn't go across the street. That story is utter rot that's been published. What he did, it was a bit of a building site, and he filled up a big coffee cup with cement and chucked it at the bus. And you can see me here in the picture, on top of the bus. Boom. Now, this guy did this with intent and intent to harm. Believe me, I can take the rough and tumble of politics, and I don't mind it one little bit. But when it threatens me physically, or it threatens people around me physically, then I think something has to happen, because that was the second time in 3 days. 2 days before that, I had a milkshake physically chucked in my face. And if we get to a point where people can't go out and campaign for what they believe in, and yes, be held to account by a crowd on a street or whatever it is, we've got a real problem. And I must admit, after Barnsley, even I began to think, how am I going to get on? You know, what am I going to do? How do I walk around street markets? What do I do? Well, it turns out that 28-year-old Josh Greeley today has got a suspended sentence and a fine of a massive £85. And I'm sorry, but I think there needs to be some sort of disincentive. So we'll begin this section on law and order with guys that have stood for election, taken more than their fair share of abuse. Something wrong here, Bill, isn't there?
I'm really genuinely shocked by this decision. You know, it's not a popular view, but I actually think violence against MPs ought to be a particular crime. 13 years as an MP, I was only fearful for my safety once. It's now an everyday experience for MPs, and I think it's got to be clamped down on really, really hard. And I think £85 and a suspended sentence is utterly wrong-headed.
Yeah, I mean, the Speaker is very aware of this.
Yeah, look,
I think
Bill's 100% right. I think it got worse. I mean, I was elected in 2010. By the end, by 2024, it got a lot worse. And I didn't know Jo Cox. I mean, she came in after I entered the House. And she was very popular. And, of course, that appalling crime. And then the person I did know quite well was David Amess. Yeah. He was a friend. He didn't have an enemy in the world.
One of the most easygoing figures, very popular.
And I remember 6 weeks before the attack, I remember speaking to him, and his ambition was to be Father of the House. And we were joking about that. And then 6 weeks later, this attack happened. And that really shifted my view. Joe in 2016, and then David in 2021. Two colleagues had been murdered. And I think things have got to change. And if they don't change, we've got to think...
the public are very unsympathetic to all this stuff. Yeah. But I would say to you at home, who are not very sympathetic about public money being spent protecting MPs, don't at the same time moan about the quality of people going into politics. Because you can't actually have this both ways. Moving on from that, we had consensus there, which is very dangerous. We can't be doing that on this show for a moment. Moving on from that, we have hate crimes. We have the proposal that Labour may toughen up on it. We even have non-hate crimes, which are still recorded by the police. If Josh Greeley had written something beastly on Facebook, he would be in prison. And I've seen so many double standards over this. The riots in Southport and elsewhere were unforgivable. But equally, 61 police officers being assaulted at the Notting Hill Carnival. I don't think there's any difference, frankly, between those two sets of crimes. And I do worry, Bill, that it just seems the mood music from Starmer and from Labour is there's going to be a cracking down on free speech, however we define that.
Well, I've got some concerns about this. Look, I'm a strong champion of free speech. As a university vice-chancellor, I championed it. As higher education minister, I stood up for the right for the Oxford Union to invite Nick Griffin of the BNP to the Oxford Union, because I think the best way that you challenge and expose extremism is through free and open debate. I also learnt, overseeing the Prevent strategy, that in defining a line of what's acceptable and unacceptable, violence and advocacy of violence is the only line you can draw, because anything else unravels and is unsustainable.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are things that are being... I mean, I do agree to a large extent that what is said on Facebook or wherever it is should be the same as us talking, and incitement is above and beyond. But do you just get the feeling, Kwasi, that free speech... I mean, we've had the boss of Telegram arrested by the French authorities. Are you worried about this?
I am worried about it, because I think the problem that we have is that you've got a government... I'm not saying it's a Labour government or any government, it's any government who are basically making the rules. And the suspicion out there is that people are just essentially just going to promote the views that they think are acceptable and deplatform, effectively cancel the views that they don't agree with. And that's the suspicion, and that gets to a very dangerous place, because essentially you're bringing in censorship, and it is a form of control that is used in totalitarian dictatorships, and that's the thin end of the wedge. I'm not saying we're going down that route
but look,
at a rate of knots, but that's the problem.
There's inconsistencies and double standards, frankly, in all parties. You know, the Tory party is in favour of free speech and open platforms until it's someone that they disagree with.
Who did they disagree? Who did we cancel?
Well, you know, the strong campaign that anyone, and I disagreed with them, but chanting pro-Palestinian slogans on a demonstration.
But that was an incitement.
Arrested.
I mean, the issue there, the point you very carefully made, is that incitement to violence is one thing.
Well, from the river to the sea...
Exactly.
You know, it's unacceptable.
I fundamentally disagree with it.
Do you?
If you actually, however, believe in free speech, I think people have a right to hold that view.
But how...
It's wrong,
well,
but
hang on a
it's
second.
disagreeable.
I mean, from the river to the sea...
How is that not
knows
violent?
How is that not violent? The abolition of Israel and the people within it.
Yeah, I fundamentally disagree with it.
Yeah, but how is that not violent? You made the point.
But hold on, you've got a right to... express that view.
But you drew a line, which I think is very good, between incitement to violence. Yeah, and that, to me, is incitement to violence.
And this is where it's subjective and tough. One last point on this topic. Yesterday, we were down to 100 prison spaces for adult males in the whole of the country. And it seems that prison sentences are getting shorter and shorter. We learnt of 147,000 potential crimes in the year up to March, who just got community notices. Do we need to build more prisons?
Yeah, we do. And look, we can debate about what the inheritance of this Labour government is, but prison places is emphatically the responsibility of the last government. Alex Chalk, the Justice Secretary, went to Sunak virtually every week saying, I need to build new prison places or I need early release. And Sunak disgracefully just sat on the problem.
I think Bill's got a point.
Look, I think you're right. I mean, you will know, you mentioned the fact that I was Chancellor, but one of the big challenges is public expenditure. And building prisons costs a lot of money. And you can see why Sunak, who had been a Chancellor, really did that.
Is there no political advantage in building prisons?
I think there is, but you don't get to see... The problem is you can't just build them overnight. So if you have a prison building programme, you're committing a lot of capital in the short term, and you only get the places in the longer term.
The capital was there. The money was allocated. The bigger problem was NIMBYism of the then government not being prepared to override local objections to the building of prisons.
So I think there were capital constraints, and we had all this business.
Well, again, it's about choices. Again, it's about choices. All these things are. Do you think, Bill? I mean, presumably Labour are going to have to build prisons.
Yes.
It's just going to happen.
Yeah, and one of the ways we're going to do it is by making this a national infrastructure priority, which can override local objections.
Well, and the same will apply to housing as well.
Yeah.
It'll be
because we desperately need more homes.
It'll be interesting to see where the money comes from. I mean, we're going to have a budget in the autumn. We'll see exactly what the tax take will be, and it'll be very interesting to see what spending choices are made.
It certainly will. I'm going to say thank you to Bill Rammell for joining us and engaging in an energetic debate. I'm keeping this Kwarteng fella here because...
I'm in detention, am I?
Well, you will be. There's no question about it. Because there's been a book published overnight making accusations that the Truss government considered cutting NHS cancer treatment to save their own political skins.
Working on TikTok. And I agree with Peter. Maybe there's a middle ground here where they can just be affable, thoughtful, civilised, polite, courteous, helpful. I think perhaps that would be a wise way for them to conduct themselves.
What do you think? You'll have strong opinions. And I know that many people actually get in touch with me when we talk about policing. Either you're retired police officers or current serving police officers. You'll have strong opinions on that. Get in touch and tell me. Look, I want to talk to you. There's a lot I want to squeeze into this programme about Keir Starmer. You know what? We shall take a break and I'll do that afterwards. I also want to talk to you about Lucy Letby. And I want to ask you, how involved should we be in